All right, welcome back to another episode of our product management book club in which we are discussing Escaping the Build Trap by Melissa Perry. So, last time we talked a little bit about what makes a great product manager. How do we look at the product manager role? What things are important? What things are important when you're building out a new product team? And we talked also about some different maybe pitfalls. They gave bad product manager archetypes, so we discussed, maybe how you might fall into those, and ultimately what do you need to do to get on the right path. And speaking of paths, today we're talking about the product manager career path. So, a lot of times we think about the product manager as a role, but also what does it mean to grow a product manager? Where do you start? Where do you end up? Because we know that that's so important for people when they join a company, is to know that they have a career path, that they have a future with the company. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. So I thought it was interesting. They start off talking about how product managers do a lot of things, which I think can sometimes be dangerous. We don't want it to become a kind of a dumping ground for all the tasks that no one wants to
Right.
do. Yeah, but they split it into three specific areas of work for a product manager, which is tactical work, strategic work, and operational work. So tactical work being, they said, shorter term activities, building features, getting them out the door. So breaking down, scoping out work with developers and designers, crunching the data, probably providing that to the rest of the team. So I think what we're seeing here is almost more of that. I hesitate to say product owner because I know we're going to draw a strict line there, but
Right.
more in that terms of like you're almost thinking about a sprint, you're working more on the timelines, like really down in the details.
Yeah.
Then they talk a little bit about strategic work. So I think, thinking a step up, positioning the product and the company to win in the market and achieve goals. So we talked about tactical work providing some of the data. So then think about maybe the data feeding into the strategic work. Okay, what are we seeing? What do we need to do? How do we get there? And then they talk about operational work, tying the strategy back to the tactical work. So here's where product managers create a roadmap that connects the current state of the product to the future state and aligns the teams around the work. So I thought this was interesting. Um, to be honest, I feel like there might be a lot of gray areas in there. I don't know if it
Right.
in practice I've seen it as clear cut as this, but I like the breakdown since, often we break down more by silos, and I think that this is makes more sense in terms of a product manager's wheelhouse. And then I do really like the graphic on page 42, which shows kind of as you go from a more junior PM, like an associate PM, to ultimately a chief product officer, how we see this switch from tactical over to strategic, and then a growing of the
Yeah.
operational category in the middle. So this idea that you start off mostly on the ground details, you start connecting that to strategy as you work your way up the chain, and then when you find yourself in leadership, you're primarily focusing on the strategy, which I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it is very when you that graph together with the explanation is rather profound. And then of course, when you look at the tactical, you're looking at a situation where, back to the graph, the associate, because they're doing more of the hands-on blocking and tackling day to day and task level activities, so to speak.
Hmm.
And strategic, as we know, is tends to be kind of that high level, long term vision. Kind of the vision mission. Let's make sure we move. We want to get to the destination, right? Our
Hmm.
goal is to deliver this product and get. Here's the big picture. Here's
Yeah.
the game, the roadmap, so to speak. And the operational is now let's do it. I think the biggest blur here is definitely operational and tactical, because operational is the day to day also, right? That means
Hmm.
you're now making it happen. It's like what you're doing to function throughout the course of the day.
Yeah.
And tactical is also some of that. And the operational is almost, I suppose here it says you create the roadmap that connects the current state to the product to the future state and align team around work. But there is a bit of a blur typically between those, because you're doing day to day in operations. That's what
Hmm.
operation is. But then in tactical, they're like, well, we're focusing on those real shorter terms, breaking it down to those. I think probably the real line there is it becomes more kind of the tasks that need to be
Mm,
done, that task level, the activities. And in operations, you're still doing tasks and activities, but you're tying it together into the business case, so to speak.
yeah.
So versus the fact of, okay, go and hammer a nail in the wall to hang a picture. Okay, great. That's tactical, hammering the nail into the wall.
Mm,
The operational is you still have to perform that, but you know you're doing that because you need to, for the business that we have here, you need to have 10 pictures up every day, right? Our
mhm.
operations is, in order for our business to do what we do, we need to make sure that well, let's go with the McDonald's example to go in like McDonald's. Okay, we got to make sure that we're producing hamburgers, we're producing fries, we're producing all of these things that McDonald's does to be operational on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
The tactical is okay, well, that means we have to do buns, for the hamburgers, and we need patties, and we need, the fine little detail parts
Yeah.
of it, the task and the activities. So I guess that's the fine line between that. And then bringing it back over to the chart, when you're at that lower associate level, you are the person up at the register, ringing up the burgers, or back at the grill, putting the patties on the grill. And by the time you get up to the chief product officer, you're, running the McDonald's operations, right? You're
Yeah.
kind of not really going in the store every day, not flipping burgers, but you're making sure that that overall McDonald's strategic, business objectives are happening at that kind of higher level. So less of the burger flipping and more of the thinking and strategizing and operations is kind of the in between, right? The day to day, kind of move it to that
Yeah.
direction and realize that those strategic objectives.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really like your kind of tangible examples because I think it's a lot easier to grasp that idea than maybe just, the theoretical here. Um,
Theory and buzzwords, right?
yeah, and I
Right.
want to keep using that example actually to explain this problem that they talk about, where I think Melissa Perry mentioned earlier in the book that there's really a lack of those entry level product manager roles. Like if you go out on the marketplace, you'll see that people are always hiring for a product manager, a senior product manager. Very rarely do you see associates, and people want someone who's already skilled at this. And to go back to your McDonald's example, it's like, yeah, we're trying to hire people to be a shift leader, to be a manager of a McDonald's, but we haven't put the effort in to train enough people on how McDonald's works. Like when you think about it, like no wonder it's not a recipe for success. We have a lack of support in that area, and we really don't have maybe some of the product mindset and culture that we see the potential for, because we're really not building that pyramid from the bottom up. We're just kind of going to the top of the pyramid and expecting it to be there. And they talk about like how important mentoring is in growing that. And I agree with Perry here that I think that this is something that overall companies could do a lot better on, is really building out more associate and junior PMs into the companies.
That is so true. And in reading this, I have a lot more respect for Microsoft and Google because
Hmm.
Perry points out, well, here are two companies that actually do this. But with the exception of these two, you're kind of hard pressed to, get that foundational skill. And it is kind of tricky, right? It's almost like, you graduate from college and you're going out into the workforce and they're saying, well, what experience do you have? Well,
Yeah.
I've been in college the whole time. I don't, I'm not a CPA. I just passed my CPA exam. I haven't really done any CPA work. Well, you got to have some experience to do this job. And it's like, where do I get this experience? To get to that point. And so there is a bit of a gap. And that's one reason too, when earlier she was pointing out the difference between the project manager, the product manager, and so forth.
Hmm.
It's really interesting because typically the pathway, because of this void, is that people might come through the project management rank.
Mm.
And then of course now you find yourself doing product management. But are you really doing product management, or are you a project
Yes.
manager in a product management role? And that's kind of what winds up happening because of this bottom that's, there, that foundation's not really there. And you find yourself somewhere that maybe the background hasn't been really laid in the correct pathway to really get you where you need to be at that point.
Yeah, I really love that you made that connection right there, because I think that that's when you were saying that, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, like this is something we need to talk about more. I think that's an important connection, that the reason why we see so many other roles at the company stepping into product management is the lack of that junior product management role. They want someone experienced. They take someone from another area of the company, often project management, because if you don't really understand what product is, you think that project and product are pretty much interchangeable.
Yeah.
And then you get someone who doesn't understand the product role and who's trying to fit it into their understanding of whatever their role was before. So I think right there, talk about a way to flip around the narrative on product management. Do we just need to create more junior PM roles instead of trying to fill them with existing company roles?
That
Oh, I can't hear you, Michael. I think you're muted.
that sounds like it's definitely what needs to happen. But
Mhm.
what it sounds like, for whatever reason, that many organizations haven't made that connection, other than Google and Microsoft. They've figured it out, and for whatever reason, many other organizations haven't quite made that connection. So, but yeah, that would be a good solution. It sounds like from what we're seeing here.
Yeah. Anyway, so we can we can keep going, but I think that that's really interesting. Uh, so one thing that I was thinking about when I was reading this is that not all companies are going to have this full ladder. Like ideally, right, we would have this full associate product, senior PM, director of product, VP, chief product officer. But especially for smaller companies, I think you might only see like maybe three of these: a junior role, a standard PM, and then a PM in a leadership role. And ideally, you would be able to separate to a large degree the tactical, operational, and strategic. But I feel like a lot of times with kind of very few levels of product at like a mid-level organization, you're gonna do a lot. Like maybe the leadership role does a little bit more strategy, but I think all of you are gonna have a pretty similar set of
Right.
tasks that you're. So I think that this is very dependent on how big your organization is.
True.
Because this to me looks like a graph for like a pretty large org. Like this is for like a Google or something like that. Um,
Right.
but yeah, for your average mid-sized company, like I don't think it would look much like this.
Yeah, and that's probably another reason. That's a really good observation you made there. It may be a real good reason why you don't have this trajectory in many organizations, because not, if you're a medium-sized organization, you don't really have a need for like all of these roles, like instead,
Hmm.
especially a small organization. You may have like one or two product people, and so they just flat out say, hey, you're a product manager, right?
Hmm.
Forget about associate. Like, we don't have that in the budget, so to speak. Just come on here and we'll drop you in somewhere in the middle, which is pretty much all we have in our ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so, you're off to the races after that. So you call out Google as somebody who this may look like, or a Microsoft, or I don't know, maybe even an Amazon.
Hmm.
But yeah, more of an enterprise would have a trajectory like this. And not, smaller organizations just don't have budgets like that, right?
Yeah.
And that might explain a lot why we don't see this pathway showing up in many of these organizations.
Yeah. But I do think in almost from like a mindset perspective, it's helpful in if you're just thinking about what you want each of these roles to be focusing on. And I think maybe this is well explained by something that Perry says later, kind of in these smaller descriptions of each of the roles, saying this is what happens if you focus too much on the operational. If you focus just on shipping products, right, we're getting back into the build trap where we're just focused on the output and the tactical. So you need some of that strategic mindset to connect it to company goals. And so I think in this we're kind of seeing not like a cheat sheet exactly, but a way to try to avoid falling in the build trap by assigning this to roles so that you're kind of giving it more definition. Um, and then just realizing that as a smaller team, you need to figure out how to define this within the people that you have and how to make sure that you're not missing the detail level or the strategy level. And I do appreciate that, like, each of these, well, they say the chief product officer and VP of product have no tactical at all, which I guess at a really large corporation you wouldn't. But
Yeah.
I, personal opinion, maybe, I feel like every every person in product should at least go back to that every once in a while. Like
Mhm.
talking to some users, doing some on the ground work, because even if only as an exercise to refamiliarize yourself with what happens at the ground level, I feel like that's important for anyone doing strategy. So just a thought
No,
there.
you're so correct. I mean, and that falls in any space that you're in. That the
Mhm.
people who really can get down there and roll up their sleeves, or at least understand that level of the ecosystem, tend to be a lot more effective because you understand it, and you're not
Yeah.
just theoretically, um, sitting up in your ivy tower,
Yeah.
calling plays. And it's like, well, that play won't even is not even in the playbook. I mean, like on this playing field, that can't happen. Like there's no way we can do that. But if you're in the Ivy Tower and that's kind of the only vantage point that you have, that very high level strategic, you have no idea. So yeah, absolutely being able to kind of get down there, roll up your sleeves, number one, to understand how things flow and have better synergy with the team. But then
Hmm.
also to your point you were just making, to really have that connection with the customer, right? If
Yeah.
you're so distant from the customer because, well, the rest of the team, the lower level guys will do that. There's something that gets missed, and this is brought out a lot in Agile in what we call handoffs. And
Mm.
so that just means that, you go from that associate and then he passes the information to the next and to the next, and then finally it makes its way up the chain.
Hmm.
Well, that game telephone that you played in school, they
Yeah.
whisper something in your ear in the first person, and they keep going around. And by the time you get to the last person, it's like, that's nothing like what this message started off being,
Yeah.
right? So you lose that whole, flow in the handoffs. And so, if you don't have that, come back home, come back to the ground level and kind of keep your ear to the ground. You ever see that show on TV where the CEO gets dressed up and he goes into the company and nobody knows he's the
Yeah.
CEO?
Yeah. 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 Uh-huh. An undercover
And they,
boss. Yeah.
undercover ball, and they learn so much, right? They're like,
Yeah.
I think we should just make this part of how this company runs, is to do the undercover boss thing,
Yeah.
because you get such a perspective from that you can't get any other way. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of value in kind of keeping that into your wheelhouse.
Yeah. Absolutely. Totally agree with that. So it was just flipping through these last few pages. They go into each of the roles more, and I don't know if I want to, do a deep dive into each of these, but just pulling out a couple things from each of these roles, kind of what Perry is highlighting is what the goal should be. So we kind of talked about associate and a product manager. Talk about as a senior product manager, you're overseeing more scope or more complex product. Um, and if you want to be an individual contributor, senior product manager is kind of where you stop. So I like that they're putting the definition between, some people like managing people, other people like being individual contributors. I think it's very important to recognize both and recognize that, not everyone wants to be a manager, is a great manager. Obviously, you can always grow people, but there should be opportunities in your company for people who want to stay in that individual contributor lane. And maybe they'd be a great mentor, but just is not as much on the people management side. Um,
And
director
that,
of
as subtle as that is, just really quick, that's important because not everybody wants to get into the Ivy Tower, right?
yeah,
So yeah, there should be a place for people who are comfortable in their skin.
yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
definitely. And so once we get to director of product, so here now Perry is saying usually only found at larger companies. So what we were talking about earlier about how these roles might shift. Um, and once you get more into scaling, this is where you'll find that role. So they're talking about starting to manage product managers, having a portfolio or a specific product line, getting into the VP of product, so managing the entire product line, maybe like a small region or something like that. And then getting to CPO. So once you have a large organization, somebody that has the vision for all of the product lines, all of the regions, all of the different areas, and being able to communicate that to the other executives, which personally, I think it's kind of a shame that the CPO is only at large organizations because to me that is your advocate to your executives, which
Yeah.
especially when you've got a role like product, which is so focused on the influencing without authority, having that voice of product at that level, I think is really important. Um, so yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on the career path. Do you have any other thoughts, Michael?
No, those are it's really good, and I'm glad that you really paused and kind of called out the fact that this this range and scale of product of leadership is not always present because there are going to be organizations that maybe study and look at this and say, oh wow, how do we accomplish, because everything that's here needs to be done,
Hmm.
but you may not have six roles in your
Yeah,
department to facilitate this flow. And
yeah.
so to understand that, okay, well, maybe we need to consolidate or have some type of pathway where we're accomplishing these things, but
Hmm.
at a different scale. But don't leave it out because each one of these touch points is very critical, right? So somehow they should be integrated in some way, whether you're a Google, which this is a snapshot of, it seems like,
Yeah,
or John's bargain store right up the street, or John's bike shop or whatever it is.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, and I think that wraps up kind of our short section on the career path. And next time we're going to get into organizing your teams. So I think we'll see a little bit more of a carry on of the career path and how we would build that team. And then we start getting into strategy, which I think is going to be really interesting. I already see a case study on Netflix, which sounds fun. But yeah, looking forward to continuing.
This is going to be cool because I also see another thing here is they're really showing the connection with Agile. So we're going to have a little bit of a blend and a mix and match here. This should be a lot of fun. I look forward to it.
Amazing. Sounds great. See everyone next week.
All right, let's do it.